The sea whispered against the jagged cliffs of Whispering Isle, its voice low and persistent, like an old secret too long buried. The sky above was the color of slate, pressing down with a thick silence that wrapped around Bellamy House like a shroud. The house, ancient and brooding, stood at the cliff's edge, with its ivy-covered walls and crooked windows staring out toward the fog-choked horizon. It had once been a place of laughter and music, but now it watched the world like something wounded, breathing, remembering. Hercule Poirot stepped down from the steam ferry with the elegance of a man who never allowed the weather to ruffle a single fold in his coat. In his breast pocket was a letter, unsigned, untraceable, and unnerving. Just one line had summoned him across the gray waters. The key that vanished at midnight has unlocked a door that was never meant to open. No sender, no context, and yet the weight of it had been enough to stir the little gray cells. Waiting for him on the jetty was a girl no older than 16, her shawl soaked through, her expression unreadable. She offered no greeting, only a quiet, "This way," before leading him along a path where the sea wind howled through the black pine trees. Bellamy House revealed itself slowly through the mist, more like a silhouette than a structure, a ghost made stone. And as they passed the gates, ornate iron twisted into the shape of thorns, Poirot noted the peculiar sensation that something was watching. Not someone. Something. The house had the feeling of a place that remembered everything. Lady Calpurnia Bellamy received him in the east drawing room. She was tall, angular, and dressed entirely in gray, her gloves buttoned tightly at the wrists, her voice barely louder than the clock ticking on the mantel. "Monsieur Poirot," she said without a trace of welcome, "I did not invite you, but I suppose you would not have come unless something was already at work." Poirot inclined his head politely. "It is true, madam. I rarely visit houses unless they are in conversation with tragedy." She stared at him for a moment before turning toward the fire. "Then you'll want to see the Blue Room." The Blue Room. The name hung in the air like the first few notes of a song no one wished to hear. Poirot followed Lady Calpurnia up the curved staircase, each step creaking as if reluctant to bear witness. At the top, down a narrow corridor wrapped in floral wallpaper, faded to the color of bruises, she stopped before a tall wooden door, painted the color of ash. It bore no scratches, no signs of recent use. "It has been locked for 33 years, she said, "until 3 nights ago, when my niece Verity found the key on her windowsill. She opened it, and the candle inside was already lit." She handed Poirot the key. It was old brass, unusually cold in his hand. Inside the Blue Room, the air was strangely still, as if the room had been sealed not just from people, but from time itself. An ancient piano stood in the corner, its ivory keys yellowed, its lid dustless. A cracked mirror hung above the fireplace, and someone, very recently, had written a single word in faded lipstick across the glass. "Confess." Poirot stood there for a long moment, his eyes narrowed, the scent of cold wax and aged perfume faint but undeniable. "Who lived here last?" he asked quietly. "My sister," Calpurnia said. "Evelyn Bellamy. She died in this room. They said it was suicide." Poirot's eyes never left the mirror. "And what do you say, madam?" Calpurnia's voice dropped to a whisper. "I say this house does not forget, and the dead do not lie quietly, when the living are still deceiving themselves." Outside, the rain picked up again, tapping against the windows like fingers asking to be let in. And beneath the eaves of the house, something creaked softly, as if a door not yet seen had begun to open once more. Morning came reluctantly to Whispering Isle, drawn out of the mist like a memory half-remembered. A pale sun pushed against the fog, casting a silver sheen across the cliffs. Bellamy House, grim and brooding, stood unchanged, its windows blank, its corridors hushed, and its secrets still hidden behind walls too old to speak plainly. Hercule Poirot sat in the breakfast room, sipping a single cup of black coffee, his gaze fixed on the reflection in the silver toast rack. Not the room, no. He was watching the people in it. Seated stiffly at the long table was Major Simon Aldrich, the house's co-owner and war-scarred brother of Lady Calpurnia. He buttered his toast with the efficiency of a man who once gave orders and now took none. Next to him, Verity Bellamy, Calpurnia's niece, thin and pale, her eyes lined with exhaustion, toyed with a teaspoon beside a full teacup she had no intention of drinking. Her fingers, delicate, precise, twitched as if searching for piano keys. Across from her sat Dr. Arlen Moore, old friend of the family, his spectacles fogged, his voice quiet when he chose to use it, which was rare. "Did anyone hear the music last night?" Poirot asked gently, breaking the silence like a pebble dropped into a frozen pond. Everyone froze. Even the clock on the wall seemed to pause for breath. "No one has played that piano since Evelyn died," Calpurnia said, entering the room like smoke. "And yet," she added, folding her gloves, "it plays." Poirot studied Verity's face. There was something in her expression, conflict, perhaps, fear, or guilt. "You are a pianist, mademoiselle?" he asked. "I used to be," she replied, not quite meeting his eyes. Not since the voices began." "What voices?" "In my dreams," she whispered. "I hear music I've never written, melodies I don't recognize. They come when the house is quiet, just before the candle lights itself." "Interesting," Poirot murmured. "And do these melodies feel familiar?" Verity hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, like they belong to someone who once lived in my skin." Calpurnia's spoon clinked against her teacup with force. "She is tired, monsieur. This house has a way of pressing down on the young." Poirot said nothing, but he noted the tension in the room, the way Aldrich stared at the far wall as if trying to see through it, the way Dr. Moore fidgeted with the button of his cuff. There was something rotting at the heart of Bellamy House. Not fresh death. An old one, covered, buried, and not nearly deep enough. Later that morning, Poirot requested to see the blue room again. Alone. Inside, the air had changed. Slightly warmer. Or perhaps it was the absence of something. He moved toward the fireplace. The mirror, cracked down one side, still bore the faded lipstick scrawl, "Confess." He took out a small bottle of powder from his pocket and dusted the edge of the mantel. A faint fingerprint. Recent. He walked to the piano, lifted the lid, and gently pressed one of the center keys. A low, uneven note rang out, D-sharp, slightly flat. He tried another, then another, and then something strange. The melody Verity had mentioned came to him, not from memory, from the room. It was there, stitched into the air like an echo. He followed it to the far wall, where faded wallpaper showed signs of past dampness. Something was odd about the plaster, too smooth in one place. He tapped. Hollow. Behind the bookshelf, he found a small hatch, old, rusted shut, but not unmovable. He would return with tools. As he turned to leave, something on the piano caught his eye. A fresh smudge, red silk thread, tangled around the leg of the bench. Verity's scarf from the morning. She had been here, after claiming she had not. Back in the hall, Poirot met Nella, the maid. She flinched when he asked about the blue room. "Best not go prying in places meant to stay shut, sir," she said. "Not if you want the walls to stay quiet." "And if I want them to speak?" Poirot asked. Nella looked up. Her eyes were older than her years. "Then you best be ready for what they have to say." Outside, the mist was thinning, but inside Bellamy House, the shadows were growing bolder. The key had opened more than a door. It had opened memory. And memory, Poirot knew, was the most dangerous room of all. The afternoon in Bellamy House unfolded like a fading photograph, colors drained, sounds muted. A storm gathered distantly along the coast, and a hush had settled in the house as if it, too, was listening for something. Poirot stood before the blue room once more, this time with a small crowbar in hand, courtesy of a reluctant Dr. Moore, who had mumbled something about violating history before handing it over. The hidden panel, once walled over, groaned as it yielded. Behind it lay a narrow passage, more crawl space than corridor, lined with decaying wood and cobwebs, like drapes in a forgotten theater. Stooping, Poirot entered. The air was damp, the smell a mixture of mold and time. At the end, a small alcove revealed itself, a triangular space beneath the eaves, barely large enough for a single person to sit. And sit someone had. A cushion, flattened by long use, a broken locket, and a candle stub, still standing in a saucer of congealed wax. Poirot picked up the locket, careful not to disturb the dust. Inside was a photo of two young girls. One was Verity, the other was Evelyn, so they had known each other far more intimately than anyone had said. He returned to the drawing room, where Verity was seated by the window, watching the storm roll in. Poirot approached quietly, but she must have sensed him. "You found it, didn't you?" she said, her voice hollow. "I did," he replied. "You used to hide there." She nodded. "When I was little, Aunt Calpurnia said I talked too much, cried too much, played too loudly. Evelyn found me one day after I'd been locked out in the cold. She showed me the hiding place, said it was hers once." "And when did the visit stop?" Verity's fingers trembled in her lap. "The night she died. I saw her, standing by the blue room. She said she wasn't afraid anymore, that she had written it all down. She told me she'd hidden it in the place where music sleeps." Poirot's brow furrowed. "And what did you take that to mean?" "I don't know. I was 10. I thought it was a game. I didn't even tell anyone." Poirot took a breath. "Verity, your aunt said Evelyn committed suicide. But you don't believe that, do you?" Verity shook her head. "No. She was afraid of death. She was afraid of being forgotten." Upstairs, Poirot visited the music room. A grand piano sat beneath a sheet, the corners tucked in too tightly. He lifted the cover. A familiar scent met him: dust, ink, and the sharp tang of aged wax. Opening the lid, he examined the strings. Perfectly preserved. But wedged between the fallboard and the frame was something odd. A thin slip of parchment. Poirot extracted it carefully. It was sheet music. Not the waltz. Something older. A funeral hymn. And in the margins, words frantic, squeezed into every white space. "He comes when a candle dies. He waits where I used to hide." Poirot stared at it. This was no suicide note. It was a confession. Or a warning. That evening, as the wind howled and the storm broke over Bellamy House, Poirot sat in the blue room alone. He placed the old candle in the holder. He lit it. He waited. The air turned colder. And from behind the walls, a sound, a faint melody. 3 notes. Played again and again, as if a ghost had forgotten how the song ends. Poirot stood. He was not afraid. Not yet. He whispered into the darkness. "Mademoiselle Evelyn, I am here. Speak if you can, for the living have lied, and the dead, they are tired of silence." Behind him, the candle flickered once, then went out. A silence followed the extinguished flame, not the silence of calm, but the heavy, charged stillness of something waiting to be noticed. Poirot stood motionless in the blue room, his silhouette faint in the moonlight that filtered through the storm-tossed clouds. Somewhere within the walls, that 3-note phrase returned. Quiet, hesitant, and incomplete. It was no longer simply sound. It was memory, aching to be heard. The next morning brought with it a sullen hush over Bellamy House. The storm had passed, but the skies remained low and bruised. At breakfast, Lady Calpurnia seemed unusually withdrawn, her spoon tracing idle patterns in her untouched porridge. Verity did not come downstairs. Major Aldrich, as always, busied himself with the newspapers, though his eyes remained fixed on a single column without turning the page. Poirot observed them all, noting how the household's tension had changed shape, from denial to dread. After the meal, Poirot requested Dr. Moore accompany him to the gallery. There, beneath Evelyn's restored portrait, Poirot revealed what he had found in the blue room's wall cavity. Dr. Moore's reaction was swift, a sharp inhale, and then the careful replacement of his professional mask. "That alcove. I had forgotten it existed. Evelyn used to disappear for hours. We thought it was part of her illness." Now he trailed off. Poirot stepped closer. "Doctor, if Evelyn was truly ill, why was there never a formal diagnosis? No asylum papers, no medical records?" Moore hesitated. "She refused examination. Calpurnia insisted we respect her privacy." "But if Evelyn was delusional, how do you explain the music? The coded notes, the candle routine, the recurring 3-note signature, found in Verity's composition, in Evelyn's diary, even in the piano strings? These are not the wanderings of a fractured mind. They are patterns, clues." Moore's voice grew low. "I always suspected something else. But suspicion is a dangerous companion in this house, Monsieur Poirot. You learn to silence it before it silences you. Poirot turned to the portrait. Evelyn stared out, painted in bold, defiant strokes, her eyes too alive to be forgotten. She was silenced once, he murmured. We shall not allow it again. Later that afternoon, Poirot spoke privately with Miss Nella, the housemaid. At first hesitant, she eventually admitted something strange. The night the candle burned in the blue room, I heard a voice through the wall. A whisper. It said, "Tell the truth before the dust remembers." I thought it was dreaming. But now, Poirot's expression darkened. He turned back toward the upper landing. There was one place he had not yet searched. Not thoroughly. The attic. He climbed the narrow stairwell past the second floor, past the servants' quarters. Dust rose in clouds as he pulled down the trapdoor. The attic was vast, dark, filled with trunks and discarded furniture. But in one corner, beneath a rotting lace veil, stood a tall cabinet. It was locked. Poirot used the old skeleton key he had taken from the blue room's wall. It turned with effort, and the door creaked open. Inside were dozens of items, letters, sketches, pages of music, all belonging to Evelyn. At the bottom, beneath yellow journals, Poirot found a velvet-bound ledger, the Bellamy estate account books. But these were not official copies. These were the originals. With trembling fingers, Poirot flipped through them. Names, transfers, signatures, and then pages with entries scribbled out, erased violently. But one phrase remained, faint but legible. Music was the excuse. Greed was the reason. I kept proof. In the sound. Poirot stared at the line. Then he closed the ledger gently, his thoughts racing. Downstairs, in the grand hall, the piano stood waiting, and from within its frame, something knocked 3 notes, again and again. The dead were still playing, and Poirot now knew why. The wind returned that evening, not with the fury of storm but the low, grieving voice of something unsettled. As night fell over Bellamy House, Hercule Poirot stood alone in the music room, his reflection distorted in the polished curve of the grand piano. The house had gone quiet again, but not peacefully. It was a quiet that listened. He opened the lid and gently pressed a key. The middle C, flat again, like a sigh cut short. Beneath the harp frame, nestled between wires and felt, he found what he had suspected all along. A hollow panel, expertly crafted. He pressed gently at its edge. It clicked open. Inside lay a narrow compartment. Wrapped in faded sheet music was a single audio cylinder, marked in a woman's hand. Requiem number 2, for the one who knows. Poirot stared at the object in silence, the implications settling like dust on the velvet interior. He had no phonograph to play it, but he did not need to hear its contents to know what it was. Evelyn's final confession, encoded not in letters, but in music, and perhaps something spoken as well. Later, in the drawing room, Poirot summoned Lady Calpurnia, Major Aldrich, Dr. Moore, Verity, and Miss Nella. Rain lashed at the windows again, as if the moor itself resisted what would follow. Poirot began without preamble. "The truth," he said, "does not hide in shadows. It waits in plain sight, wearing familiar masks. But now, Mes Amos, those masks must be removed." He held up the cylinder. This was hidden inside the piano. A final composition, perhaps a confession, but more importantly, proof that Evelyn Bellamy had uncovered something dangerous. Lady Calpurnia's face had gone pale. Her voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. "What are you suggesting?" "That Evelyn's madness was a fiction," Poirot said calmly. "Convenient. It made her warnings easy to dismiss, her accusations easier to bury. But she was not mad. She was brilliant, and someone feared her enough to silence her." All eyes turned to Major Aldrich. His jaw clenched. Poirot walked slowly, deliberately. The true records were hidden in the attic. The ledger showed embezzlements, assets misappropriated from the family trust, starting just months before Evelyn's death. But one signature appears over and over again. He turned. "Yours, Major." Aldrich rose sharply. "I did what I had to. The estate was bleeding. She wanted to expose me, to ruin the family name." Poirot's voice was quiet but firm. And so you staged her death. A locked room. A tale of madness. But even dead, she fought you. She left signs, coded in music, hidden in keys, burned into the ledger you tried to erase. Lady Calpurnia covered her mouth. You knew, Simon? All this time. Aldrich turned to her, bitter. And what would you have done? Let her destroy everything our name built. She was my sister. Calpurnia cried. She was ours. Poirot stepped between them. She was the conscience of this house, and it is she who has revealed the truth. Verity, seated silently until now, stood slowly. Her eyes were wet but clear. The music, she whispered. I hear it even now. Poirot nodded. Because it was never meant to be buried. Not her work, not her voice, not her story. Major Aldrich did not protest further. Perhaps he knew the weight of a lie too long carried. Later that night, Poirot sat once more before the piano. The house had stilled. The rain had softened. And when he pressed middle C once more, it sounded true, finally. In his notebook, Poirot wrote, Justice, like music, does not fade with time. It echoes until someone listens. The morning after Major Aldrich's confession dawned with a strange quietness, as though Bellamy House itself had exhaled a sigh long held. But Poirot knew better than to mistake stillness for peace. The confession had opened a wound, but healing was another matter. Truth does not settle easily. It stirs what lies beneath. Poirot asked to be shown the old chapel, an ivy-choked stone structure that leaned near the cliff's edge, long disused. Lady Calpurnia hesitated but agreed, leading him there with slow, measured steps. It was Evelyn's favorite place, she murmured. She came here often, even when she stopped speaking to the rest of us. The chapel door groaned as it opened, revealing pews eaten by moss and a nave littered with fallen plaster. Light filtered through broken stained glass, painting the dust in bleeding reds and bruised blues. At the altar stood a single brass holder, and within it, though it had long since gone cold, the melted remains of a beeswax candle. Poirot knelt beside it, brushing away layers of grime from the altar's base. Beneath, carved by hand into the stone, were faint initials, E.B. She left her mark, Poirot said softly, as if to say, I was here. I will not be erased. Lady Calpurnia stood motionless beside him. I see her everywhere now. Her music, her handwriting, her face, Verity's face, reminds me so much. Poirot looked up. Do you fear ghosts, madam? She gave a hollow laugh. Not of the dead, only the ones we carry inside. Later, in the blue room, Verity was found staring at Evelyn's portrait. Poirot joined her in silence. She was never cruel to me, Verity said at last, but I always felt she held something back, as if I reminded her of something painful, or someone. Poirot studied her profile. The resemblance was undeniable. The truth glimmered quietly, just beneath the surface. Did your mother ever speak of Evelyn? He asked gently. Verity shook her head. Only that she died young, that she was not well. Poirot's brow furrowed, and he stepped to the old writing desk by the window. A letter had been wedged deep within its back panel, long forgotten. He opened it. The handwriting trembled, but the emotion was precise. To the child I could never claim. You are my music, my heart. I could not be your mother in name, but I have been your mother in every note I ever wrote. One day, when the music returns to this house, perhaps you will understand. Verity read the letter in silence. Then she closed her eyes. She was my mother, she said quietly. Poirot nodded. And you, her final unfinished song. Downstairs, Dr. Moore awaited Poirot in the conservatory. You were right, he admitted. I suspected, but I said nothing, not even when I treated her for those bruises the month before she vanished. Poirot folded the letter carefully. Silence is a luxury, one the innocent rarely afford. That night, Verity played Evelyn's final composition in the music room. The melody rose gently, like mist lifting from water, then swelled into something clear and unshaken. As the last note fell away, no one spoke. Poirot stood in the doorway, hands folded, eyes gleaming. The past does not stay buried, he whispered. It waits for the right voice to give it breath. The morning that followed felt sharper, as if the rain had washed Bellamy House clean, but left the bones exposed. Poirot awoke early, his mind heavy with the revelations of the night before. Evelyn Bellamy's hidden letter had shifted the balance, not just of knowledge, but of grief. Verity was no longer only a niece. She was a daughter unaware of her own origin. And somewhere, within the remaining silence of the house, Poirot felt the last truths still trembled, waiting. By mid-morning, Verity came to him. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, her voice clear but unsure. "Last night, after the music, I heard something else. A sound beneath the floor of the blue room. Like breathing." She looked away, embarrassed. "I know how it sounds, but I swear I wasn't dreaming." Poirot's expression did not change. "No, mademoiselle. It is not madness. It is instinct, and it is often the first sign of truth." He returned to the blue room. The floorboards were warped, but not from age alone. He moved carefully, tapping with the silver end of his cane. One board near the bed rang hollow. With the help of the groundskeeper, they pried it open. Inside was a narrow cavity, just deep enough to contain a flat, velvet-covered box and a tin cylinder. Poirot opened the box first. Within lay a necklace, rubies and pearls, its clasp broken. "This," Poirot murmured, "was reported missing the week Evelyn disappeared." He looked to Lady Calpurnia, who stood in the doorway, pale. "I said she took it," Calpurnia whispered. "When it vanished, I accused her, but she denied it. And yet here it is," Poirot replied gently. "Not worn, not flaunted, hidden." He opened the cylinder next. Inside were several thin phonograph records, their labels handwritten. One was marked, "Testimony, July 8th." Poirot summoned the household. In the drawing room, with the gramophone restored, he placed the record on the spindle. A soft crackle. Then Evelyn's voice, clear, brittle, and shaking with anger. "If I am gone, this is my voice. Calpurnia has lied. The money father left me disappeared after she was named guardian of Verity. She promised to care for the girl. But I knew Verity was mine. Born in shame, yes, but she is mine. Simon threatened me when I told him I'd go to the police. He said I'd end up like our mother, mad and forgotten. If anything happens to me, it will not be an accident. It will be their doing." The room froze. Calpurnia collapsed into the settee, her hand shaking. I never meant for her to suffer. I only wanted to protect the family. The name. It was Simon. He said she'd ruin us." Poirot turned toward Major Aldrich's portrait above the fireplace. A man who claimed to value honor above all, and yet he silenced the only truly honorable voice in the house. The silence that followed was profound. Verity wept quietly, the necklace resting in her hand. Dr. Moore sat back in his chair, face drawn with years of withheld suspicion. Poirot rose, his expression grave. "You buried a sister, not in earth, but in silence. You allowed a child to grow without knowing her mother's face. And all for a name, a house, a legacy that now crumbles under its own secrets." Lady Calpurnia did not respond. She only stared at the gramophone, as if Evelyn might speak again. Later that evening, Verity sat at the piano, the necklace beside her, and began to play Evelyn's composition again. But this time, she improvised, adding notes of her own, completing it. Poirot listened from the hallway, his hat in hand. "The house no longer whispers lies," he murmured. "It listens, and perhaps, for once, it hears." Twilight came early that day, casting long, bruised shadows across Bellamy House, as though the walls themselves were flinching from the truth. The gramophone's echo still lingered in the halls, as if Evelyn's voice had soaked into the very wood, and would not be silenced again. Poirot remained in the drawing room well after the others had withdrawn, his mind measuring every word, every glance, every silence, now loaded with new weight. The pieces were aligning slowly, with the stubborn elegance of an old waltz, but one key remained missing. It was just after dusk when Verity returned to him. She carried with her a bundle wrapped in linen, which she placed gently on the table between them. "I went back to the tower," she said quietly. "Behind Evelyn's old wardrobe, I found this." She unfolded the cloth to reveal a second portrait. It was of a woman seated at a piano, But this was no studio piece. It was personal, intimate, and hauntingly unfinished. Evelyn mid-motion, head turned just slightly to the side, as though about to speak. "There's something else," Verity continued. "In the mirror behind her, look." Poirot leaned in. The painted reflection of the mirror behind Evelyn's figure revealed more than it should. A second person, barely rendered, stood behind her in the image. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a crimson sash. "Major Aldrich," Poirot whispered. "She painted the truth in plain sight." Verity nodded, her face pale. "I believe this is the last thing she ever painted. It must have been hidden away before anyone could destroy it." Poirot stood, his voice grave. "Then this, mademoiselle, is not just a portrait. It is a confession, and a condemnation." Later that evening, Poirot asked for the household to gather once more, what he called a rehearsal before the finale. Lady Calpurnia arrived supported by Dr. Moore, her usual composure fragile. Verity remained silent but watchful. Nella hovered by the doorway, too nervous to sit, and in the hearth light, Poirot placed the portrait upright on a chair, letting it stare directly at those seated before him. "There's a reason Evelyn painted herself unfinished," Poirot began softly. "Because her life was taken before the final stroke. And yet, as artists often do, she left behind a message. In the mirror behind her, a face. One the family knew. One she no longer trusted." He turned to the Major's empty chair. Simon Aldrich silenced Evelyn not because she was mad, but because she was precise. Because she would not be quiet about the accounts, about Verity, about the theft of her music and her inheritance. And most of all, because she had no fear left to be used against her. Calpurnia, eyes wide, shook her head faintly. "He told me she would ruin us. I believed him. I let her be buried without even a gravestone." Poirot stepped gently toward her. "Then it is not too late to correct what has been stolen, madam. Not from you, but from your sister." That night, Verity placed the painting upon the easel in the music room and finished the portrait with trembling hands, adding the final brushstroke beneath her mother's name. Outside, the storm had long passed, and the moonlight poured through the window like a benediction. And Poirot, from the corner of the room, simply watched, murmuring, "The dead do not need vengeance. They need to be remembered rightly." The silence in Bellamy House had changed. Where once it lay heavy and oppressive, weighted by unspoken truths and hidden sins, now it lingered with a different kind of hush, a silence of breath held, as though the house itself had exhaled for the first time in decades. The storm had passed, but a different kind of reckoning loomed on the horizon. Poirot, always sensitive to the atmosphere that clings to old walls, knew that the final revelation was no longer a question of deduction, but of confrontation. Major Aldrich had not appeared since the unveiling of Evelyn's hidden portrait. His room was empty, his bed undisturbed. The remaining household avoided discussing it directly, but unease grew in glances exchanged, in teacups left untouched, in doors half closed but never locked. Poirot descended the east wing staircase, just after midnight, following a whisper of instinct and the faintest scent of cigar smoke that didn't belong to the current hour. He moved past the old nursery, past the study where Evelyn once kept her journals, and paused outside the sealed door of the bell tower, a room closed off for generations. The brass handle, long disused, was warm. Inside, beneath a slanted beam and a shattered pane of stained glass, sat Major Aldrich. He looked older somehow, crumpled rather than seated, a decanter beside him and the remains of a torn ledger across his lap. He did not startle when Poirot entered. Instead, he stared at the rusted bell chain hanging above. "She was never mad," Aldrich said without preamble. "I knew it. I knew it even then." Poirot said nothing. He let the silence draw the confession forward like breath after drowning. "I tried to scare her," the Major continued. "Thought if I could convince her that she was becoming like their mother, restless, obsessive, consumed by whispers, she'd step back from her threats. But Evelyn, she was stronger than I expected. She laughed in my face." He paused, eyes hollow. "That night in the blue room, she said she'd expose everything. How I'd misused the inheritance, sold off parcels of land, altered documents. She had proof." Music was just her way of cataloging it. A damn symphony of betrayal. Poirot walked forward slowly. "And so you struck her?" "No," Aldrich snapped. Then softer. "Not at first." I shouted. "I left. But when I came back, she was gone. Vanished. The window was open. I thought she jumped, perhaps. But no body was ever found. Calpurnia refused to involve the police. She said, better a myth than a scandal. We sealed the room. We buried the name." Poirot's eyes did not soften. "You didn't kill her with your hands, monsieur. But you buried her with your silence. That is a crime of its own." Aldrich crumbled then, in the way proud men do when confronted with truth too old to rewrite. Poirot turned to the broken window. The sea beyond was calm, eerily still, like a page yet unwritten. Later that morning, as the sun crept reluctantly across the moor, Poirot gathered the household one final time. Verity, pale but upright, sat with the finished portrait beside her. Calpurnia stood by the hearth, a letter in her hand, the one found behind the piano leg, Evelyn's final plea. Poirot addressed them all in measured tones. Justice, MES Amos, is not always handed down in courtrooms. Sometimes it arrives in the sound of a key returned, in the melody of a song once silenced, in the truth drawn in oil and linen. He turned to Verity. "Your mother's voice was not lost. It was buried. You have unearthed it, note by note, brushstroke by brushstroke." Verity's eyes shimmered. "I only wanted her to be remembered rightly." "And she will be," Poirot said gently, "because you refused to let her become just another ghost." As the family prepared to inform the authorities, to write the records, and to unseal the Blue Room forever, Poirot stepped outside into the thinning fog. Bellamy House did not feel lighter, but it felt honest at last. In his notebook, he wrote, "A house haunted is often just a house that remembers. And truth, like music, must be played through to the final bar, or it will echo, unfinished, forever." The morning was unusually bright, the mist having retreated as though ashamed of its long embrace with the land. Bellamy House stood bathed in pale sunlight, its old stones soaking in warmth they hadn't known for years. The storm had passed, the truth had been spoken, and in its wake lay silence, not oppressive now, but reverent, like the hush before music begins. Poirot stood once more in the Blue Room. The cracked mirror had been removed, the candle extinguished. The air no longer held that choking stillness of secrets repressed. Now it was open, still, and waiting. Lady Calpurnia sat nearby, staring out the window, a letter in her hands, Evelyn's final words. Her face was unreadable, but something had shifted. Not peace, perhaps, but the beginning of it. Verity, standing at the old piano, began to play. Her fingers moved over the keys with delicate certainty, and the room filled with the mournful beauty of Evelyn's lost composition, now complete. The final bars, written in Verity's own hand, merged seamlessly into her mother's theme. A legacy not stolen, but continued. Downstairs, Major Aldrich had surrendered himself to the arriving authorities. There was no fight, only a quiet acceptance. He said little, and asked only that Evelyn be given a proper grave, a place to remember her rightly. Poirot had nodded solemnly. Some justice, at least, must be witnessed. Poirot wandered the garden one last time before his departure. He paused beneath the oldest yew tree, where Evelyn had once written her music in solitude. The wind passed through the branches with a sound like breath, like a whisper too soft for language, but understood all the same. Miss Nella approached him near the front steps, her apron damp from morning chores. She handed him a small envelope. Inside was a page torn from Evelyn's diary. One line was underlined. "Even when I am gone, I will play until they hear me." Poirot pocketed it without a word. He looked up at the manor one final time. "It is not ghosts that haunt us, mademoiselle," he said quietly. "It is the unfinished truths. But today, one truth has found its voice." At the train station, the whistle cried out across the moors. Poirot boarded without ceremony, his small suitcase placed precisely beside him. As the countryside passed in blurred strokes beyond the window, he opened his notebook for the last time on this case. He wrote, "Bellamy House did not need an exorcism. It needed a reckoning. The past may fade, but it does not disappear. It waits, like a page unturned, like a song unfinished. But when the final note is played, the silence that follows is honest. And with that, the great detective closed his book, leaned back into the velvet of his seat, and allowed the rhythm of the train to carry him onward, into another mystery, another silence waiting to be named.